Okay, I think we're on air. I just apologise for any background noise because I'm in the middle of a construction site at present and there's a bit of drilling going on. But just to introduce myself, I'm Lindsey McEwan. I work at the University of West of England. I used to be at the University of Gloucestershire. I moved here 2 years ago and I had to make a choice about what to talk about here. I'm not talking about the FCERC Sesame project because actually Tim Harries and I are doing something on that in September. So I've opted to do something on the Flood Memories project. And that's what I'm talking about today. So I've done a webinar once before and I'm just going to give it another go. So here we go. The important point here, I'm going to talk for about 30 minutes, is just to be aware of the website. The website for this project was initially at the University of Gloucestershire, but it disappeared once the last colleague who was at the University of Gloucestershire left. So we're currently reinstating it under the WordPress address that you can see below. So that will be the new website. Okay, in terms of the structure of the webinar, what I was going to do was initially set context, just very briefly, because I expect I'm speaking to the converted and the aware here, a little bit about the ESRC Flood Memories project that completed in November 2013, but is still running on in an ESRC knowledge exchange project until November 2014. And I was just going to reflect at the end a bit about my learning from that and how it feeds into the Sesame project that's funded through the Sandpit. The other thing I just wanted to outline at the start is that this is very much a team event. I'm PI and my background has done work. I come actually from a geomorphology background, but doing much more work at the interface between the natural and social sciences, also working with the arts, and with interests in flood risk management, flood education. Jo Garda Hansen, who is now at Warwick and is interested in media memory. Professor Owen Jones, who's now just moved to Bath Spa, hence the disappearance of the website, and he's a cultural geographer. Dr. Andrew Holmes, who's the research associate on the project, who has a background in oral history, and Dr. Franz Krause, who was the RA and had a background in social anthropology. So that is the project team, and just to acknowledge their inputs here, because it's very much a team project. Okay, in terms of context, people will be aware, I'm sure, about the policy shift post the 2007 floods. We had the PIT review, we have the Flood and Water Management Act, and the strong focus on community action in all of this. The notion of community lead adaptation planning for resilience, the fact that we're now dealing with distributed flood risk management. There's been a paradigm shift since the 1990s, but there are issues about community catch up with this and the language of community. We saw it play out in the Somerset floods and the implications of all of this for community awareness and indeed for community action. And what we've done within this project is to focus very much on the floods that were on our doorstep when I was at the University of Gloucestershire, the 2007 floods, which were described by PIT as the most severe UK peacetime crisis. And one of the things that was notable about all of this was just the recovery time that it took floodplain groups, indeed communities, to recover. Some of the people were out of their houses in Tewkesbury for 2 years. And it was compounded by the fact that we also had the issues around water supply. Sorry, I'm getting emails in here. Apologies. If you just bear with me. Okay, that should solve that problem. Okay, so overall the project aims were to look at how these communities recognise very much that communities are a contested term, and we spent a lot of time debating that at the early stages of the project, but looking at how communities remember and archive experiences, thinking about how communities materialise and protect flood memory and the associated local knowledge within their communities and within their culture, and thinking through about how flood memory might have a particular role in developing community resilience to risk and its links, and particularly how it's intertwined with local knowledge. and thinking about how communities themselves, but also the agencies charged with working with communities in terms of flood resilience planning, how they might protect and engage and support the development of flood memories. And I've put an asterisk there thinking about other agencies who have a potential role, because we were keen to bring new voices to the table. So local archives, people in the media were also people that were involved in the project. So what do we mean by sustainable flood memory? We got a little bit of a jip in terms of putting sustainable and flood memory together, but I think it is justified in terms of exploring the links between collective memory of extreme floods and lay, local, indigenous, however you want to describe it, knowledge. And we're talking about memory here that's community focused, that is archival, it accesses archives and disseminates from archives. It integrates the individual, but also the collective experience of communities. And very importantly, it has two axes. It has a vertical axis, and it also has a horizontal axis in terms of intra and intergenerational communication. And this memory is important both in terms of strategies for capturing and protecting it, but also in its way that it encapsulates strategies for dealing with future flood risks. So it links the past, the present, and the future. And so that's the concept that we were playing with in terms of the development of the project, and exploring how that might play out, both as a concept, but also in terms of how research might inform management. So in terms of the communities that we worked with in the project, we initially had 3 settings in the original bid, but after discussion with our stakeholder competency group, which was a group that worked alongside us as co-producers through the project, involved the local authorities, the Environment Agency, and a range of others, we added in a 4th setting. So setting 1 was a setting with regular flood experience and a large core of established inhabitants. And after much discussion, we went for Tewkesbury Old Town, which has a long sense of living with flooding and living with water as part of its flood heritage. And then we looked at a community which hadn't flooded a long time before 2007. Indeed, at the stage of the planning, we thought it might never have flooded before. But actually, in the end, we went for Tewkesbury Newtown and Priors Park and Northway, that are other areas around within Tewkesbury, sort of bordering on Tewkesbury. And those areas, some of them were affected in part by the 1947, but by no means extensively. There were bits that were affected. The 3rd setting was a community that had been flooded several times over the last 70 years, but we wanted an area which had lots of comings and goings in terms of the inhabitants, and the people were more transitory. We actually went for a setting with a lower socioeconomic characteristics as well, and that was Westgate in Gloucester. We went for there. And then actually in terms of discussion with our stakeholder competency group, we added a rural setting, which we combined the villages of Deerhurst, Appley and Turley, which they sit on the lower Severn as well. So those are our settings. Okay, our methodology. I don't have detail this now I don't have time this now to detail our methodology because it was quite complicated, but the areas that I want to draw on in terms of this presentation are the interviews we did with residents in the 4 case study areas. And just to explain, we initially used a snowballing methodology that yielded certain groups within that. We recognised that we needed to, in terms of a sort of quota sampling strategy, we needed, in terms of gender and age, to actually draw on more. And we did also trial an e-survey and also more ethnographic ways of approaching people in terms of gaining material from them in settings that were more comfortable for them, perhaps. So we had we've got the 4 case studies where we were interviewing the residents. We also carried out participant observation. We also carried out semi-structured interviews with organisations and agencies, but I'm not going to talk about that there. And we have worked in workshops, archival workshops with the communities. We have produced web-based guidance, and we're currently on the ESRC a knowledge exchange project as well. So I can talk a bit more about the methodology if people are interested, but we are looking at digital storytelling at present in terms of a way of exchanging some of the learning from this project with the communities. Again, taking that strand, a very important strand of co-production, right through to in terms of impact. Okay, so the semi-structured interviews, we dealt with a number of different themes. We asked people about the 2007 floods, what happened, how they reacted. We asked them about previous flooding, knowing that there had been floods in the 1960s, there had been floods in 1947, there had been previous historic floods during the Little Ice Age and so on. So we knew about the flood histories, we knew that we were in a flood-rich period in the River Severn, so we asked them about that. We asked them about their perceptions of memory and resilience. We asked them about ways in which they recorded the flood. We asked them about ways in which they shared the stories, the images, other records that they had captured during the event. We asked them about remembering and forgetting and their reflections on that. And we asked them about maintaining and developing memories within their families, within their communities. And that was the platform. And from that resource, that archival resource of interviews, we've got about 70 plus hours of interviews that were transcribed and thematically analysed using NVivo. What I've done today is just to highlight one or two of the themes that were coming through and to give you one or two indicative quotes. I recognise I'm going to have to deal with these slides relatively quickly, but please feel free to have a look at them, reflect on them, and if you want to email me afterwards or have a conversation afterwards, then I'm very happy to do that. So there were various themes that were coming through when we started to analyse this data around the importance of emotion and affect in memory, about different and changing ways of materialising flood memory as individuals and in communities, about the importance of certain areas in the memories that were coming through around childhood memories of living with water, around how around family and friend networks and I guess community capital that might be drawn on floods and how that actually is highlighted within memory, about active forgetting and the will to forget for various reasons, but also the flip side of that around active remembering, again for various reasons, and about relationships with other agencies in FRM and how those are remembered and how those actually might fuel or not fuel action. Okay, so I've just put one or two slides and quotes up. But one of the things that struck us very early on was just the whole range of emotions that can be at work. I've cited here anger, fear, but also excitement, awe, confidence, all sorts of different sorts of, and in complex relations and intensities I've noted down there as the flood plays out, you know, both during the flood, but actually in the recovery period as well. And what we found that often a memory of a past event is also a memory of an emotion. So, for example, a fear, or it could be around excitement. And in remembering that event, the emotional response becomes active again, as I've noted here. So there are some challenges there from an ethical point of view about, you know, how you engage with people around this sort of subject area. So here's an example of one of the quotes we've this was actually from our e-survey. You know, my most memorable experience was the feeling about being trapped in my own home, the fear I felt when the water was rushing through my home and the safety of my 2 children and pets. Being a single parent at that time, was hard because I knew I couldn't lift my furniture, just the things I could carry upstairs. I lost everything on the ground floor, and seeing the damage the next day, I was devastated. So there's that emotional angle. I know at the flood assembly we talked a bit about health angles on all of this, but yes, there's the immediate effects, but also the effects in the recovery period. We had people indicating that they felt that the actual emotion didn't set in until quite a bit later on. We also noted different ways that floods are being recorded and materialised. So we have flood marking against physical or known points of reference. We had people archiving in all sorts of ways, pubs collecting photographs and so on at individual level, people doing this within family. So I've noted down about social media. I might say a little bit about that in a minute. But also, I think the materialisation of floods within the everyday. So for example, the fact that sockets are higher and things like that, that people have that sort of memory of the flooding through their everyday use of the space within their homes. And so we see, for example, here we are, 2 examples of marking that took place. This is one in Tewkesbury Abbey, so a focal place within the community, and another one within a farm in Deerhurst where the family had actually marked 1947. This is William Morris marking showing the height of 2007. I don't know whether he's actually marked it physically on, but the sense of that sort of history is really important. But we also have people removing marks as well, and there's incidences where floods were marked and have now been removed for various reasons, and we might explore why that forgetting might be taking place. There's also other forms of archiving that take place as well in the context of historical floods. I just kept that slide in, but a whole variety of more traditional ways of archiving floods through postcards, through collections, through photographs, through marks. But there are also new archives, and this is a slide I used at the Assembly. I think it's quite an important one around the notion of new community archives that actually challenge the nature of the community and link the local to the global. And that quote by Derrida, which indicates, that what is no longer archived the same way is no longer lived the same way. The exchanges that we heard, for example, with people in Tewkesbury and the tsunami victims in Japan, those sorts of exchanges would never have taken place. Twitter was not quite of age in 2007, so we're looking at a particular slice of time here. Other things that were coming through around learning to live with water, the childhood engagement with flood risk, that sort of watery sense of place, if we're talking in some more cultural geography terms, about knowing what you can and cannot do in living with water, and sort of notions of risk as well. This particular quote is about sort of coping strategies. An older member of the community in Westgate in Gloucester saying it was a regular thing in February that you'd look across the meadow, which incidentally is now a landfill site, so you can't look across the meadow in quite the same way, because the river would overflow and you keep your eye on it and you say, oh yes, it's coming up, get the furniture, get the carpets up. So that theme around childhood memory and as part of the knowledge base for dealing with flooding came across quite strongly in certain communities. Also came across was the importance of family and friend networks. This is an example of an interview from somebody in a pub in Tewkesbury, citing how his memory was around his family and friends who'd been trying to help the pub, which actually floods very regularly. About always looking at the bright side of life. We had drinks in our hands, and Dad went, "That's it. What's happened has happened," and they're all starting singing the Monty Python, always look on the bright side of life. And he says, it's on video somewhere, I wish I could find it. That will be something I'll remember for the rest of my life. So that in terms of community capital was really important but also in terms of memory. So let's go to the active forgetting and will to forget, and it poses questions about the people who want to remember, and also about what the implications for adaptation and post-flood learning, particularly if those are key people in community. So just looking at the time and running through quickly, active forgetting can be around emotion, about the pain of remembering. The floods were terrifying, every bit of rain, every bit of flooding terrified some people, and that the sense that new lay knowledge is not fine-tuned yet, i.e. that every heavy rainfall causes flooding. So that link between emotion and experience and memory, an issue there. Around active forgetting, what's the message around flood alleviation works? It will never happen again, or is this a flood risk area? An example here from Deerhurst, talking pre the flood, saying they had their protection scheme, so they were quite confident. Really, this is before 2007. Active forgetting to ignore flood risk. Issues where some communities prefer to forget, flood marks removed, back in business. We don't want to be branded a flood town. And also tensions with organisational memory here. So I suppose we do our bit here, but I don't think the councils do enough. You've got to go and interview them. I don't think they do enough to remember, do they? They want to choose to forget. So that tension between community memory and organisational memory, which for various reasons might be shorter. Also for referral of responsibility, this is a new town which hadn't experienced previous flooding on the scale. I don't think they should dwell on it too much. Leave it to the authorities to try and be alert and be aware of the possibility of the flood. And around flood fatigue and moving on, this is again in Gloucester, you know, they have moved on, so has the city, of course, and the 2012 floods didn't cause problems, the city was kept dry and so on. This has put the floods into even more distant memory. So those are all situations with which might lead to active forgetting, and there are obviously discussions to be had if that is necessary. Some elements of that are necessarily a bad thing in terms of coping strategy. But there's also the flip side of that around active remembering and the characteristics of the people who want to remember, and again the implications of that for adaptation and post-flood learning. So, for example, there's active environmental remembering, where the lived experience of flood memory is as anecdotally knowledge about the markers in the communities, in the landscape. So, for example, here's a woman who actually doesn't engage that much with the Environment Agency. There's actually somebody in this community who's known as NOAA, who is the sort of portal of flood information and is respected beyond any agencies. But this woman goes and checks her local stage board and knows from past experience when her area is likely to be flooded. So that's sort of proactive action. And there's also active remembering as a catalyst for action. So here we are, the memory of the flood, an association of people gets together. So this subcommittee was formed of 5 of us, I think, and we started making plans to get grants. So there, that active remembering of being as a sort of as a powerful oil to fuel that engagement with the Environment Agency and others to try and come to sustainable solutions for local flood risk management. And also active remembering around taking responsibility. Here we've got a situation about closing flood gates. That actually the community wants to take responsibility to that and to be empowered to do that. And that being part of their planning in terms of and empowerment in terms of community resilience. Another thing that came through quite strongly was the relationships with agencies in flood risk management, highly variable, but sometimes they could be both positive, agent to flood memory and that sort of capturing of lay knowledge, but other times it could be problematic. And one of the things that came through quite strongly was the need to show the agencies to show that their lay knowledge and worries were taken seriously and addressed. And there was a very strong perception, which actually was played out with some of our institutional interviews, that institutional memory can be very short through staff changes, through secondments, and through the fact that, for example, drains cleaning of drains are outsourced and so on. And that sense here, as you see that quote, they haven't to this day talked to us about how we felt about flooding. So I, again, have to part that slightly, but there's a whole series of different themes interwoven. We did ask people about, how they might develop knowledge, and this slide doesn't really do justice to it because it's both about formal learning but also social learning and about bumping into things as well. So suggestions around the curriculum, around festivals. Tewkesbury used to have a water festival. I'm not sure it still has. It went into abeyance, and I'm not sure it's back. Presentations and having facilitations to actually share stories, exhibitions in public spaces, in private spaces, and so on in people's houses. One woman threw her house open to for an exhibition actually during the floods in 2007. And here we've got a woman in Westgate who's saying, I've got lots of pictures. She lives in sheltered housing. And the newcomers wouldn't have had a clue, but she's sharing her stories. But then there's the issue there about where you've got older members and older knowledge within communities disconnected in some way because they're in sheltered housing or they've actually moved away from that particular setting. So what we're looking here at is knowledge integration and knowledge interaction, and the importance of positive interactions that allow those knowledges to integrate in ways that are not conflictual, as we were seeing playing out in the Somerset levels. And I'm using knowledge here in quite a wide way around knowledge, skills, attitudes. And so there are questions about how we link all of this to the development of community resilience. how we, for example, might learn from the rural, cohesive community to the urban, to newer urban settings, how we might archive and share memories and local knowledge, and how both communities themselves and agencies might co-work there, including bringing archives, local archives into the discussions, and how to use flood memory to build emotional resilience, an interesting area there that is obviously ripe for exploration, and how we link the horizontal and the vertical axes, the opportunities for intergenerational learning about past flooding, about past flood knowledge, about coping strategies, about things that might be more transferable from past to present to future. So just a few words about the ESRC Flood Memories project, knowledge exchange funding subsequently. It's a partnership project with the Environment Agency, but also involves Gloucestershire's County Council and Gloucestershire Rural Community Council. And we have gone back to the original transcripts of the project and to look at it with a very wide preparedness lens, really. So we've looked at preparedness in a very wide sense, not just about sort of things like that might be more obvious about structural preparedness and so on. We've looked at things that are emotional preparedness, about adaptive strategies and so on. And we went through the transcripts and we drew on all this, and then we started looking at them from different resilience perspectives or frames, so infrastructural resilience, community capital, and so on. And we've been working with the members of communities who were originally involved in the project to trial different models of community-generated digital stories around preparedness. And the overarching point about this and the way that we are trying to work is that the messenger is not the Environment Agency, it's not the local authority, it's a member of community. And when we're working with Environment Agency colleagues, the colleagues who are involved in the engagement side of things tend to be people in marketing communications rather than those people who might have a experience of the more softer side, and that applies to language and approach, and whether we're dealing with knowledge transfer or knowledge exchange or knowledge co-generation. So I think this part of the project has potential to be particularly impactful. What we're doing this now is we've finished our community workshops. You can see the flyers there. Those were all very different events, and we learned as we progressed through them about the engagement. We're now taking those stories out to other communities, to communities that were in the Severn Valley but were not part of the original project, to communities with similar sort of flood risk context but actually beyond. So we're actually doing work in Slough in the Thames Valley, and then going to the southwest and rapid response catchments to look to see how some of the learning from that project can actually be transferred to those settings, whether it is viable or not, or whether actually the stories need to be generated in the communities that are have experienced flooding. I mean, the potential there to use these sorts of resources in communities like we've got in Bristol, for example, who haven't experienced recent flooding but did in 1968. So as a learning tool. Okay, that's just a front. So that was just we don't have the time or the facilities to run through the stories, but they're all got different themes, and we're currently constructing a website so they can be shared more widely, so people can see what we've been doing. I think this is my final slide. Yes, it is. Okay, so what does all this experience bring to the ESRC Sesame project? The work package that I'm involved in is around longer adaptation and behaviour change in small and medium-sized enterprises after flood experience. And I was reflecting a bit on what it brings to the table, because it brings a whole series of different things. Some are more general things around interdisciplinary working. In the Flood Memories project, I'm a physical scientist in my origins, but now works at the interface. And I'm working much more with the arts and humanities. Rather different in the Sesame project, because I find myself more in the middle ground with the agent-based modelers and the social scientists and so on. So I think that's really, because I think with these projects, to maximise the potential, you really need to reflect on the interdisciplinary nature of them and how you maximise that rather than dealing in silos. We're planning co-production within our work package. That phase is just starting, so we've got a stakeholder competency group where you work with people all the way through, and I've learned through doing that in the Flood Memories project, and I think some of my learning from that will impact positively, well, it already is, in the way that we're engaging people and keeping them in for the long haul. So it's not flash and dash, as the artists call it, in terms of how you engage people. About the potential to integrate different types of knowledge, we're looking at expert, lay, local knowledge, Indigenous knowledge, but when we're looking at SMEs, yes, we might have other sorts of knowledge. I put down entrepreneurial knowledge, but I think it's an interesting question where SMEs sit in relation to communities, and what characteristics are similar to the communities they may or may not be part of, and how they relate also to larger businesses in terms of the knowledge side of things, and how they bring that to the table in terms of their learning and their behaviour and their potential for behaviour change. And also we're doing work here on e-learning and using digital stories around preparedness, and using the storytelling and more narrative approaches in terms of exchange of learning and as resilience tools, and that process is being evaluated. And so when we're reflecting about the intervention that we're designing with communities with the SMEs, then we've got that learning in terms of whether we can actually combine some of these more narrative approaches along with in terms of engagement with the science, such that businesses are actually talking to businesses about their experience of working in the project, and also about their needs in terms of resources for adaptive learning and behaviour change. And just to watch that space, because that process is starting in September. So thank you very much for listening to me for about half an hour. Sorry, I'm just looking at my watch, not dipping down. So if anybody's got any questions, then feel free, and I'll do my best to try and answer them. So I'm just going to have a drink. Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question about archiving and about the different ways in which I wrote a paper with some artists in the Journal of Arts and Communities, and we reflected on this, because traditional archiving can embrace all sorts of things, including, if you're singing about the songs about the Mississippi floods, to more traditional things like cutting out newspaper cuttings and presenting those. So the social media side of things, I think, is a real opportunity, but I think the challenge is about linking the generations as well, and the extent to which we can do that within social media, because there are some sections of society that potentially can be excluded, those people who are not web savvy and so on. I think there's a great opportunity to, in terms of archiving and digital archiving, to research in that area. Yeah, I mean, I think that local authorities are in a journey of travel because of their new responsibilities. And certainly some of the people that we've involved in the stakeholder competency group, we've been having conversations with them that suggest that there is a journey of travel. There's still the issue, I think, within local authorities that we find this quite regularly with projects, that they are, they're seconded from highways to flooding, and there's an issue about both in terms of the engagement with local knowledge within communities, but also in terms of how the local authorities themselves archive material, and indeed how they value it, because some of the material that's coming from communities is much more anecdotal. And what is the value of anecdote in all of this? Is it something that needs to be validated through photographs or so on, or does it have value in its own right? So I think that's a really interesting area in terms of the engagement between agencies and local knowledge and flood memory. Okay, you're about to film some of your flood plan leads to produce digital case studies to promote others. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I think there's, with the digital stories, we've had a lot of debate with the Environment Agency as to what extent you have to have the backstory in there, or whether the story in itself can be constructed to be impactful. And I guess what we've gone for short and sharp. So yes, there may be a backstory within the sort of accompanying text, but actually these are personal reflections of people, and the best of them are quite powerful. I mean, what we've done is the individuals who are involved are selecting their own images. So I mean, the book craft, it is very much a exercise of co-production. So in terms of the crafting of the story, initially we had thought that you know, we would be able to use at least some of the transcript material verbatim, but actually that has proved, you know, that's not the process people want. And so it was never our aspiration to do everything that way, but it might have been some quick wins, as you say. But actually, Andrew Holmes, who's been doing a lot of the engagement work, you know, there's been a considerable dialogue and toing and froing with communities, and indeed the archive. We ran workshops to construct some of the stories as well, and those were really interesting processes. You couldn't really predict how they would play out, yeah, I think just producing the stories, but also trialing them with groups as well. The groups that you're wanting to engage early in the process is really important. I'm very happy to have a conversation outside this meeting if it would be useful in terms of our learning, because it has been, certainly for me coming into this, I have done digital story work before, but much more in sort of oral history context rather than something that is very much about trying to engage people around potential action. So I hope that's helpful. Okay, yeah, no, I mean, I think that's another learning point. I'm sure that the approach we're using with digital storytelling and the messenger, the exchange, some of the stories are not specifically about flooding. They could be transferred to any sort of stress, really. So I think there's probably some more generic learning about the approach that could be usefully shared and applied, and that's our intention. Oh, sorry, there's another one here. Yeah, yes, I think about citizen science, that's a really interesting one about how materials are archived, but also I know Joe Gardner Hansen, who's been working with us, has been stressing the point of the longevity of archives. You know, we're able to go back to Gloucestershire archives and see the large book around the 1770 floods in Tewkesbury and about, you know, the detail of what happened during that. But we know that technology dates really quickly, and whether the archives that are digital archives, making those accessible into the future, may be an issue. So there is an issue about how you collate this, but also how you ensure its longevity. In terms of the slides, I think that the whole thing has been recorded and is going on the website. So yeah, I'm very happy to share the material and to and also once we've got the website up and running, I'm having to do some transfer of material from the old to the new to ask Catherine to put the link around again. And so if people are interested, they'll know that it's now got the old stuff on as well as the new stuff. That was an update from Catherine there. So Yes, I understand this is a resource, and I'm aware there's a whole lot of people from the other Flood Memories project listening in, and hopefully there's some material here that actually can feed into that in a useful way. I know that it's rather a different disciplinary group of people, but hopefully some of this material has also been useful in that context. It's a pleasure. Thank you very much, Catherine, and thank you very much for a very good assembly. It was really, I did my short couple of slides on this at the assembly, so it seemed appropriate to flesh it out a bit here. So thank you. Bye, everybody.